国民の皆様の負託に自信を持って応えられる状態で亡くなった以上、総理大臣の地位にあり続けるべきではないと判断いたしました。総理大臣の職を辞することといたします。
That was in 2020 when Shinzo Abe resigned the position of Prime Minister of Japan for the second time. This resignation marked the end of an era in Japanese politics unlike any before, and once again opened the race for the office of Prime Minister to the most prominent figures in Japanese politics. Abe served from 2006 to 2007 and again from 2012 to 2020. The time span of over 3,000 days in office makes him by far the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan, with 390 more days than Eisaku Sato, the second longest-serving Prime Minister since the end of the Second World War. In fact, most Prime Ministers serve around 1 to 3 years, just as Abe did during his first term. That begs the question, how did he manage to come back in 2012, and how did he retain power for such a long time? To answer that question, we need to go back and try to understand Shinzo Abe as a person, as a politician, and his groundbreaking political strategy in the crucial election of 2012. Shinzo Abe, born into a politician's family in 1954, followed into his father's footsteps and became the representative for Yamaguchi Prefecture's 1st District in 1993, shortly after his father died. After taking several high-profile government positions, he worked his way up to Chief Cabinet Secretary in 2005, making him the obvious candidate for Prime Minister after the resignation of Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi in 2006. He won the party vote and succeeded Koizumi in September of 2006. Just 1 year into his term, multiple scandals involving his cabinet members diminished Abe's popularity, and in 2007, exactly 1 year after he took office, Shinzo Abe resigned, officially due to reasons of poor health. Abe's party, the Liberal Democratic Party, is the most prominent political party in Japan and has controlled the government for most of the time since its establishment in 1955. It is generally described as conservative, but because of its enormous size, politicians and members encompass a wide range of ideologies and opinions, ranging from moderate centrists to business-friendly neoliberals, and to hawkish ultranationalists and even pro-China politicians. In the general election of 2009, for the second time only since 1955, the LDP, which was ridden by scandals at the time, lost in a spectacular fashion. It was the worst defeat for a ruling party in post-war Japan and gave a comfortable majority to the largest former opposition party, the center-left Democratic Party, which subsequently formed a coalition with another left-leaning party, the Social Democratic Party, as well as the People's New Party, which consisted mainly of former LDP members who opposed the privatization of the postal service 4 years ago. At the time, many people thought the LDP was in serious trouble of splintering into different factions, or even disbanding altogether, not an uncommon occurrence for Japanese political parties. All signs pointed towards a change in the Japanese political system and signaled the end of the era of domination by the LDP. However, the Democratic Party and its leadership would soon find out that they took office at possibly the single worst point in time since the end of the war. In 2009, the global financial crisis swept over the world and hit the already stagnating economy of Japan especially hard, with devastating effects for its industrial sector. Then again in 2011, as the world economy slowly began to recover, the Tohoku earthquake, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan, caused widespread devastation in the northeastern parts of the country. The tsunami that followed the quake caused a meltdown in 3 nuclear reactors of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986, the Fukushima disaster caused a leakage of radiation which led to the evacuation and displacement of approximately 150,000 people in the surrounding areas. At the time, it was unclear whether the radiation could be contained. The Democratic Prime Minister at the time, Naoto Kan, would later write that he thought this might be the end of Japan as a sovereign country. Voters were quick to blame the government for mismanaging both crises, giving the LDP a chance to regain power. In late 2012, the last Prime Minister of the Democratic Party, Yoshihiko Noda, seeing the hopeless state of his party's chance of winning any elections, struck a deal with the LDP and dissolved the parliament, effectively calling a snap election in exchange for the LDP's support for a tax increase bill. Early polls already suggested a devastating loss for the Democratic Party. In the end, they lost 251 seats to reach only 57 seats, whereas the LDP gained 175 seats to reach 294 seats in the House of Representatives. The LDP then formed a coalition with its Buddhist conservative ally, New Komeito, to gain a two-thirds majority in the House of Representatives, enabling them to overrule any opposition in the upper house, the House of Councillors, as well as initiating the process of amending the constitution, a long-sought goal of some of the LDP's top politicians. The LDP was back on track, and the person who was leading them was Shinzo Abe. Abe was Prime Minister from 2006 to 2007 for exactly 1 year until resigning, officially for health reasons. In truth, the Abe Cabinet at the time was extremely unpopular, with many of its members having to resign because of corruption scandals. When the LDP found itself in a favorable position in early 2012, a party leadership election was held to determine the individual likely to become the next Prime Minister. In the first round of voting, Abe took second place behind his arch-rival Shigeru Ishiba. In the runoff, Abe clinched a victory with 108 party diet members voting for him and only 89 voting for Ishiba. The Japanese voters' mindset since the early 90s was mainly focused on overcoming the stagnating economic situation Japan found itself in. Political issues prominent in the US, like abortion rights, gun ownership, or same-sex marriage, have very little traction in the public discourse in Japan. Military spending, foreign policy, and especially the handling of World War II war crimes with neighboring states like Korea and China were more prominent in a certain contingent of Japanese voters. However, most Japanese people didn't care about these issues the way they cared about the economic situation of Japan and its return to the stellar levels of the 1980s, with rapid improvements in quality of life of every citizen. During Abe's first tenure in 2006, he focused mainly on foreign policy issues. He gained some popularity with his decisive nature during the Japanese abductee crisis with North Korea. He also caused conflict with neighboring states invaded by the Japanese in World War II by continuing the tradition to visit the Yasukuni Shrine, which is controversial for enshrining Class A war criminals from Japan. Abe also set his sights on revising Article 9 of the Constitution, which restricts the military. Economic policy, however, fell short during this time because Abe mainly inherited the reform package from his predecessor, Koizumi, without the will or ability to amend any of it. Abe tried to position himself as a strong leader who defends Japan's interests against its geopolitical rivals and tries to make Japan a stronger nation on an international stage. While this certainly struck nationalist and patriotic sentiments in some of the voters, the fact of the matter is that the unifying issue for almost all voters was the economic stagnation, which has plagued the country for nearly 2 decades, and Shinzo Abe was seemingly not interested in making economic policies one of his central foci. After his resignation in 2007, Abe has likely come to the conclusion that the Japanese voters do not share his passion of nationalism, and that he would need to make economic policy the centerpiece of his future campaigns in order to gain enough political power to hopefully drag along some reforms and issues he personally cares about, like defense or foreign policy. This is made evident by looking at his campaign in 2012, which centered around his personally created economic policy, later dubbed Abenomics. Abenomics presented a bold agenda unlike anything the Japanese electorate has seen since the economic stagnation in the early 90s. It consisted of three so-called arrows. The first arrow consisting of an aggressive monetary easing policy in close cooperation with the newly appointed head of the central bank, Haruhiko Kuroda. The second consisting of an increase in spending with financial aid aimed at stimulating the economy. The third arrow consisting of structural reforms to combat deeply rooted issues like the shrinking birth rate. The arrows are in reference to a proverb, which says that three arrows together cannot be as easily broken as one. It was a perfect way of communicating specific economic policies, something largely deemed incomprehensible and boring to the average voter, whilst still being important under an easy-to-follow umbrella term to the electorate. Abe managed to regain the support of most of the voters lost in 2009 and won a historic landslide victory in 2012, in large part due to his bold economic policy. The fact that he took economic policy and made it his central issue, even going so far as to attach his own name to it, is one of the main reasons why he was able to hold on to power for so long after 2012. He presented a long-term plan with reforms which were in itself more aggressive than those of Koizumi, but further situated from voters' everyday lives. While the privatization of the postal service was controversial because not only many people worked there, but also because almost every person made use of it, significant upticks in government spending enabled by a loose monetary easing policy is deeply entrenched in the economy, with its effects hitting Japanese households only indirectly, for example, an increase in the price level of products. Of course, racking up government debt should be worrying, especially for Japan, which has the highest national debt in the world. It is still something which cannot be felt directly by an average voter with limited macroeconomic knowledge. Another reason is that what people thought would hit the LDP in 2009, the splintering and disbanding, in fact hit the opposition. After the disastrous loss in 2012, many popular members of the Democratic Party defected to create their own parties, with limited electoral success. In 2016, the Democratic Party merged with splinter parties and formed the largest opposition party to date, the Constitutional Democratic Party. Though no opposition party was able up until today to seriously challenge the LDP administration. Abe retained the majority in the upcoming general elections in 2014 and 2017, losing only a small number of seats. During the 8 years of his second term, the economic situation in Japan improved considerably, even though economic growth targets set by the government were seldom met, and inflation targets weren't achieved at all. Whether this improvement is attributable to economic policies included in Abenomics is certainly debatable, but the improving economic situation was enough for voters to entrust Abe to hold on to power and finally making him the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan. Of course, with COVID-19, the economic situation in Japan worsened in 2020, and the Tokyo Olympics, a central piece of Abenomics' third arrow, were postponed. With the economic situation worsening and the crisis management abilities of the Abe cabinet under question, Shinzo Abe resigned, again, officially due to health reasons, this time probably indefinitely. The second term of Abe's premiership also included many issues based around foreign policy and military, most prominent being issues like comfort women, Korean women being forced into prostitution for occupying Japanese soldiers in World War II, as well as a controversial anti-terrorism law which gives military and counterintelligence services more leniency, somewhat comparable to the Patriot Act in the US, albeit far less powerful. In the end, however, Abe did not really manage to fulfill his true ambitions, as a revision of Article 9 was, despite the LDP's supermajority, still infeasible. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in videos about Japanese politics and history, feel free to subscribe and comment on what you would like to see next. Have a nice day.